Hi guys, Manike Panda. So about 2 weeks ago, Amplitude dropped the patch for Endless Space 2, which changes all of our custom faction creation. Really strong nerf, but also extremely needed. A lot of the custom factions that you could create were quite powerful because of the non-limited traits. Now we are limited to 8 different traits, which gives us plenty of playroom, but doesn't let us get too overpowered for your custom factions. Before, you could take a lot of negatives that pretty much didn't apply to your race or what you're trying to do and just exceedingly overpower yourself. It made endless difficulty very easy. If you've watched any of the other race creation videos before this, then you understand exactly what I'm talking about and just how many traits you could load onto them. First race we're going to look at today is we're going to look at the Shipbound Affinity for our gameplay. So we're going to be playing the Vodjani's basic gameplay affinity. We're going to be using arcs to colonize pretty much everything that's possible. For our visual affinity, we're going to play Riftborn, so we're going to be playing a production-only race. The Riftborn and Shipbound Affinity go extremely well together. Basically, what it allows you to do is you have arcs that completely ignore food production whatsoever. When you're able to completely ignore one of your resources in a game, generally it makes you extremely strong in the others. So we're going to be doing that and just trying to get ourselves ahead as much as possible with that production. For our home planet type, we're taking the arid type. Normally, if you're looking at a production-heavy race, you'd take a Mediterranean in your jungle, but because we're playing a production-only race and not needing food whatsoever, arid is actually the best home planet. It gives us a lot of production, a decent amount of dust, and a decent amount of science with minimal food. For our politics, we're going to be taking the ecologist politicians. What it'll do is basically it allows us to colonize all of the telluric planets from the get-go without any penalties. So in our starting of the game, our first system will actually have every single planet colonized in it, as long as there's no gas giants or anything like that. Because we're playing a industry-based race, we're going to be taking Utopian. It's the only support that we're going to take for our ecologists, but because we'll be doing a lot of production-based buildings, it's going to be pretty strong and look at keeping our ecologists in power for as long as possible. For our actual race stats, we're going to be taking Adapt Workers. Basically what it does is it gives us +5 on all of our Empire traits, with the exception of Influence and Food. Obviously we're not using food whatsoever, so it's going to be the best and biggest boost that we can get. What we're aiming to do is just try and get our production as high as possible. For our secondary, we're going to take Anomaly Stalkers. What this gives us is an extra 5 science per population on anomalies. Now this does stack up, so if you have 2 anomalies on a planet, it does go to +10 at the moment. They may change that in the near future. I'm not 100% sure on Amplitude's outlook on the gameplay, but for now it stacks up. This is basically going to give us a really good strong start. We're going to have a decent amount of science, we're going to have a massive amount of production, we're going to be able to churn out all of the buildings that we need and all of the feed ships that we need to be able to leech off of the neutral factions and actually discover them. For our last and final population quality, we're taking the peer review. By far, it is the strongest 50 population quality. The 20% cost reduction on your technologies is ridiculous. While it's not as strong on Shipbound, purely because they don't gain so much population like the other races, it is still above and beyond all of the others. Other good honourable mentions go to Mercantile, because later on in your mid-game you're going to be converting a lot of your dust into essence so you can continually expand. It's an extremely strong one as well, and obviously the mass production for your additional is just doubling down on existings. So it's a personal choice between those 3 for this race. I prefer peer review purely for the science cost reduction. It comes into play really big in the late game, and it accelerates you in the early game once you hit it. For our actual faction traits, we're playing the Shipbound, so we're never really going to be neglecting our fleets. Even in the early game, we're going to be looking at getting leech fleets out and stuff like that. Big fleets is a really big hand for that. Because we're going to be leeching off of systems, we can have that extra ship in there. It allows us to send sort of combinations to the planets. So instead of full leech ships, we can send 3 leech ships plus 2 escorts that have a single leech module on them as well. So they can still leech, and it'll give the leech fleet actually a little bit of protection. So if pirates come along, or you have an event where an enemy is spawned in the sector, you're not going to actually be taking the loss of essence gain, because your ships are going to be able to sit there and be guarded. It also helps if you do those guard ships as scouts and keep a probe module on them. You can actually use them while you're draining essence to scan the planet's anomalies, if there's any curiosities, and actually increase your relationship with the faction at the same time as leeching off of them. For our second trait, we're going to take Biophobic. Basically, this helps us colonize those big 5-planet systems. A lot of the time, you'll find 5-planet systems have a lot of cold, Arctic planets, those sort of things, when you get in the larger ones. The trade-off between having a negative on a fertile planet is that most fertile planets generally give you a positive happiness anyway, so the 10 doesn't hurt us that much, whereas the 20 buffs us through the roof. This means that we're not going to have unhappiness issues when we're playing early game, colonizing full systems at the same time, because we've got ecologists, right? And it just allows us to buy time. We can have those systems, alright, they might be unhappy, but we can increase that over time instead of them being rebellious from the get-go. While with Shipbound you can sort of game the system a little bit by docking and undocking your arc. If your ecologists fall out of power, you just need to be aware that you can't do that anymore. So having that insurance against any kind of rebellion makes sure that we have a smooth transition through our whole game. Now, we need to make up a couple of the points. We're going to be making friends with a lot of the neutral factions anyway, so we're going to have a lot of manpower coming in. So basically, taking a hit to our actual manpower costs for upgrading our ships and stuff like that aren't going to be that big of an issue. So we can free up 10 points to give us a more focused build, taking combat rookies. Now, because we are playing an entirely production-based race, we're making sure that we buff every single bit of production that we can. Alright, while we didn't take the actual bonus for it, we're making sure that we take the full 3 points into constructionists and get the 30% extra production. That's going to give us an extremely strong buff through the entire game. For our fifth trait, we take the Crowded Planets trait. Now, with Vodjani, I've run into a thing where... Sorry, the Shipbound Affinity, not Vodjani specifically, but their gameplay affinity, is I've run into a thing where I can't get past whatever the smallest planet's population is. Now, I don't know if this is a bug, if Amplitude's fixing it in the future, or whether it's working as intended. But the Crowded Planets basically makes that a lot more difficult to hit. So, for instance, a gas giant that would generally have maybe 1 or 2 population, with that has 3 or 4. So it means that the system's going to be much more valuable than it would have been with that cap problem. Like with combat rookies, basically we're going to take Doubtful Tacticians. It's pretty much 3 points for us. You're going to be using pretty much one combat tactic through all of the fights, and you're only really going to use one a turn anyway, so you don't have to worry about your actual tactics for it. Most of the time you'll be using your armor or shield buff, or on rare occasions you'll crit if you're fighting something specific. Because we're not going to be influencing elections, we're also going to take Lousy Senators. We're not going to be generating enough influence to actually deal with the elections anyway, because we're taking such a big penalty. So taking it sort of is a negligible fact, because we're not going to be influencing the elections because we don't really have the resource, because we're not focusing into it. It's just 3 points for us to take something more important to us. Now, for our starting tech, we're taking Xenolinguistics. The reason we actually take this over anything else like Strange But Good or something like that is it's an immediate boost, okay? We have at least 4 planets in our home system. Right, so that's 40 production as soon as this building is built. Generally, from our starting production, it's going to take 2 to 3 turns to be completed. Right, and then any temperate or fertile just add to that bonus, and that's before anything else is calculated, like the constructionist bonus, etc, etc. So we want that building out as quickly as possible. It's going to allow us to build our population, because we're Riftborn, we can actually build the shipbound population using industry instead of using essence. Alright, and it's going to allow us to build our elite ships quicker so that we can get more arcs out and accelerate our gameplay. I hope you guys have liked the actual explanation. Sorry for any stutters or anything like that. If you guys have any feedback, make sure you leave it in the comments below, and I hope you enjoy playing what I call the Rift Reavers.